Does this look familiar? Why is this not working? It's because it's an architecture diagram. So you can tell that someone technically minded created it, and their goal was 100% accuracy. They have layered in every product, every capability, every connection point, absolutely everything all in one place. But really, it's not telling a story. It would be really confusing for a salesperson to try and explain this, and really, really hard for a customer to try and see where they fit into it at all. So while that last visual was an architecture diagram, this is what it looks like when it's reimagined as a marketecture. So you can see, there's still a ton of information, but it's been compartmentalized and organized in a way that a customer can actually look at it and see where they fit into it. But there's actually a story being told, and that's the important thing about what separates an architecture diagram from a marketecture. So while a marketecture is a visual representation of your market offering, it's really, really easy to overcomplicate them. Of course, you could be representing your products, your services, your capabilities, but a way to confuse people really easily is to try and layer all of those in at the same time. So, it's great if you want to pick one. Of course, if you need to represent something more than just your products and you want to layer your services in, that's okay, but the goal is to keep it as simple as possible. So who's involved in the process of creating a marketecture? Of course, a product marketing leader is really heading up the charge here, but they can't do it alone. They need to collaborate with a lot of other people. So that means bringing in product management to make sure everything's actually making sense on the back end, bringing in engineers to get their perspective, and of course, it's always great to have buy-in from the CMO. But then who benefits? Sales always benefits because they're speaking to that slide and it's helping them make a sale. Marketing, they might use that marketecture all over the place. Execs might use it to discuss business strategy. And then of course the end buyer benefits because hopefully they have a better understanding of what it is they're purchasing. What are the stakes of having a great marketecture? But really the question is, what happens if your marketecture sucks? Think about who's benefiting and speaking to your marketecture slide. Often salespeople are using it to sell whatever it is that you're offering. So let's say an everyday salesperson is presenting your marketecture. Let's just pretend this next visual is what they're showing. It's a strawberry, right? As a prospect, I'd be looking at it and I'd say, hey, I understand what a strawberry is. I know what it tastes like. I see that it has seeds. It looks like a perfectly good strawberry. I really know what to expect from it, right? But wait, it's not a strawberry. It's cake. So think of that strawberry portion as the marketing shine. The frosting on the cake makes it look beautiful. But if your salesperson or your rep or whoever's speaking to it doesn't understand and doesn't explain that it's actually cake and all of the complexity and the layers inside and how everything works as a system, it could become entirely misleading. And it could be problematic in a couple different ways. It could just mean that they're oversimplifying or overcomplicating and just confusing their audience. So really, if that marketecture truly acts as a conversation slide, you want your team to know that they're describing that whole cake and not just the strawberry. Because really, at the end of the day, you want everyone to be telling the same story. And that's because your strategy falls apart if everyone in your org is saying different stuff about what you do. So if your team doesn't have a solid marketecture, they'll speak to your products and your offerings in their own special way. And that type of control loss can cause a lot of problems. When your message is inconsistent, it weakens your ability to stand out well in the market. Okay, so next, how do you actually make a marketecture impactful? But really, more importantly, what makes a marketecture good or serviceable, let's say? Everyone's problem is the same. You know what the problem is. You know the value that your solution brings. If that's coming across in your marketecture, that's good. If it's easy to understand, the hierarchy makes sense, it's roughly 80% accurate, great. So what takes your marketecture from good to actually great? So everything about making it good plus being story-driven and connecting to the rest of your messaging. So it's important to know why the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. If your org remembers how to speak to your marketecture, the prospect remembers what you want them to remember, that's great. But above all else, if your team is actually using your marketecture and it's been adopted across the org, that's incredible and you're killing the game. So a way to make your marketecture truly memorable is to represent your org's unique perspective, that special sauce, if you will. So the most important, impactful marketectures are ones that are driven by story and the point of view of the company. So ultimately, the marketecture should live on one slide to be that conversation slide, but your marketecture isn't a messaging framework, and it still needs to map back to your key messages somehow. The build-up, the messaging, and the story and the deck ahead of that slide should all be cohesive and come together when you land on it. There's a pretty simple recipe to follow when it comes to creating an impactful marketecture. So first, you want to make sure you're connecting your story to your design and the way that the offerings are visualized. And then you'll want to develop a clear visual hierarchy and think about what the most important part is to your audience. And then make sure your point of view or your secret sauce is very visible and has great hierarchy on this slide.